To Native Bidaské, Native News Online's weekly spotlight on the people making news and leading change in Indian country.
My name is Levi Rickert, publisher, editor of Native News Online. I'm joined today with Neely Bardwell, who's a staff reporter here at Native News Online, and a special guest this week, Cheryl Crazy Bow. She's a Lakota Nation. She is the president and CEO of the American Indian College Fund based in Denver. Dr. Crazy Bow's experience is steeped in Native higher education. She has served as president of a university in her home reservation, faculty member. She has been dean of economic affairs, vice president of administration, served at St. Francis Indian School as chief education officer. And as I said, she is now the president of and CEO of the American College Fund. Welcome, Dr. Crazy Bow. How are you today?
Good. I'm Petawashte. Good day. It's good to see you.
Yes, and before we start talking, now I understand you had a special day on Wednesday at the American Indian College Fund. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, thanks, Levi. I was really happy to get to celebrate my 10th anniversary of joining the American Indian College Fund as the president and CEO. So we had a catered lunch from Takabi, which is an Indian-owned restaurant here in Denver. My staff bought me beautiful flowers, and they gave me one of Bethany Yellowtail's Res Girls Can Do Anything t-shirts. So it was really nice. Lots of well wishes, lots of love and prayers. I really appreciated it.
So would you say Res Girls Can Do Anything? I love that.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, you've been doing it for 10 years, and I think as the joke goes in Indian country, if you stay anywhere for 10 years, you're doing a really good job. So congratulations. And I know that the American Indian College Fund is doing fantastic work. And we brought you on this week because of two reasons. Recently, that there was a report released on the study of the affordability for college students. And I know you were joined with three other Native scholarship organizations. So we'll talk about that. And then last week, President Biden announced his student forgiveness relief program. So we'd like to talk about that as well. And let me ask the first question, and then Neely will ask the second. What do you plan on doing with this study, the survey that was released about the affordability? Moving forward to help alleviate some of the issues, the barriers that were laid out for Native students?
Yeah, so this study, which was conducted by the College Fund in collaboration with 3 other national Native scholarship providers, American Indian Science and Engineering Society, or ASIS, Native Scholars Forward, which many people know used to be the American Indian Graduate Center, and then the Cabell Scholarship. We all partner together to provide advocacy and visibility for Native students. The reason for doing the College Affordability study was because our funding partner, Lumina, had indicated to us that whenever they received college affordability data from any of their partners, Natives were not included. The data set is often not considered significant enough. So our team joined together with some other Native scholars and other partners and created a data instrument that allowed us to look at both current scholars and alumni of our scholarship programs to find out what their experience was like and how financial resources were either an asset or a barrier to their college experience. So our intention is to use this to tell the bigger story of Native people's experience with higher education, to advocate for increased funding, to advocate for other kinds of interventions that can be supportive, like tuition waivers, and to help people to understand that in order for Native students to give back to their tribal communities, they need to be able to afford to go home. And oftentimes, the economies in our communities are such that students' incomes are not sufficient for them to be able to pay their student loan, which many people don't realize what a significant burden that is, and also live. So they have no choice sometimes but to seek other positions. There are other implications too, in terms of students who perhaps pause in college and then struggle to go back to college because of their debt. So,
Neely, before you ask the question, let me introduce you, because you are in fact a third-year college student at Michigan State, as well as your position here at Native News Online, and you came on as an intern. You did such a great job. We hired you as a staff reporter, so she's doing a great job for us. But she is still living some of these situations in the affordability study. So I thought it was really important she came on today. And Neely, if you want to just tell a little bit more about yourself, then ask your question, that'd be great.
Yeah, so at Native News Online, we did do, the story. I wrote the story. So I was able to, dig into the study a little bit. And as a full-time college student, I have indeed experienced, financial hardships, not only as a college student, but also as, a Native college student. And so being a Native college student, not only do I experience financial hardships, I also experience, issues with the college climate, issues with, some racism, issues with, just having to do a lot more work than my white counterparts. As far as that goes, was college and university data included as part of the study? And if it was, are you aware of any colleges or universities where Native students are experiencing kind of a greater amount of financial stress compared to others?
Yeah, so the study is college and universities students across systems. So it's students at predominantly white or mainstream institutions, public and private, and at tribal colleges. So it's a pretty broad spectrum. There were a lot of students from mainstream institutions. Tribal colleges generally don't support loan programs, so they weren't necessarily the main target for it. The data does not present itself in a way that allows us to look at individual institutions, but we do know that affordability for some of the larger institutions that are often attractive to Native students, like the Ivy Leagues or big public universities, oftentimes the financial viability of being able to go to those institutions is real limiting. So we see a lot of students taking advantage of community college systems, taking advantage of the tribal colleges, many of which offer bachelor's and graduate degrees now. So I think we're trying, we can't really say, specifically which institutions might be causing particular burdens. I think it's pretty widespread.
There's maybe like three big takeaways for me when I went through the study, and we want to obviously amplify the study because many times, as you well know, Dr. Crazy Bo, studies are released and they end up on somebody's shelf or end up in somebody's computer file and nobody hears about it again. But so I'm telling you right now, if you want to help amplifying it, please reach out to us. We will do that because I think there's some really profound information there. And one of the ones that I think that 67% of Native American students are like the sole providers of their incomes or the income. So they're expected to contribute. And then another one was 16% are homeless or have been homeless. And so I just found that very interesting. And then the third one, the takeaway that I saw was the idea that healthcare is a major thing in terms of, as I recall, it was under the table of unanticipated costs associated with going to school. So those barriers are very real for Indian country. And what can maybe some of our viewers do to help Native American students?
Yeah, so I think there's lots of ways you can advocate. To tell you, as a person who worked with tribal government or Indian education my whole life and been a Native student myself, it's very alarming to think of how many of our students have housing insecurity and food insecurity,
Mm-hmm.
and how many of the students in this study identified that they ran out of money. And we had conducted a study with the Hope Center that looked at some basic needs among tribal college students with some of the same alarming outcomes. A real high number of homeless or housing insecure would be better to say, rather than
Yes,
houseless.
yes.
They weren't sure if they could pay their rent or things like that. And then food insecurity, where students actually indicated that they ran out of food. And so that makes going to college really challenging. So we feel that there can be lots of ways that higher education can be supported. I'll name some. The tuition waivers that are offered by some institutions reduce the financial burden and allow the student to put more of their funds into their basic needs or family support. The same is true of providing in-state tuition instead of out-of-state tuition, which some states like Colorado are doing for significant numbers of Native students. Institutions can provide more scholarship funding. They can themselves provide work study funding. They can provide paid internships. They can pay students to do research projects. There's ways that they can get income into the hands of students. There's also the opportunity to support scholarship providing organizations, the ones that I named earlier. The College Fund, for example, we receive no government dollars, all of the support that we provide, and we expect this year to give out about $15 million in scholarships. That all comes from individuals, foundations, and corporations. And $5 matters. So
$5 matters, yes.
$5 matters. I tell people that if you can give us and any of the scholarship providing organizations support, that we can provide scholarships and emergency aid. So the research also shows that emergency aid is a way to help Native and other low-income students who run into an obstacle, a car breaks down, they have to go home for a family commitment, that they don't have the financial resources to do that. Emergency aid is shown to help students persist and stay in school. So there's different kinds of things that can be done, that provide that support. You mentioned the number of students who are also providing for their families. I think recognition of that has a lot to do with financial aid eligibility and, broadening the understanding by the federal government and state legislatures of where financial aid comes from and how it's distributed. I think that's really something that people can educate themselves about and look to. We advocate that more Native specific housing be provided, to overcome that. We advocate for food banks and things that help students meet basic needs. So I think there's a whole range. We would like to see, multi-year scholarships. Oftentimes scholarship funding is unstable at institutions and with organizations. And so students can't necessarily depend on getting, a 4 to 6 year scholarship commitment, so that removes that insecurity about funding. So I think that there's a lot of solutions.
So now that the study has been released, what are you hoping that non-natives and bigger kind of financial aid institutions like FAFSA, what are you hoping that they take away from this study?
Well, FAFSA, is the way that the federal government determines your financial eligibility for federal aid. And so that system requires kind of a combined effort to try to address the flaws in that system that really impact middle and lower income families, so that the family contribution is more realistic. And we also want to encourage like financial aid offices to be more facilitative of helping students navigate their financial need. For example, every institution has what they call their financial aid budget, and that's what you're eligible for in terms of receiving different kinds of resources like scholarships or federal financial aid or state aid, tribal scholarships, all those kinds of things. And once you reach that, sometimes systems aren't friendly toward helping you if you have the opportunity to get additional aid to do something like maybe buy a computer to help you with your classes or pay for additional childcare. So I think that, that's a systemic issue. That's a real challenge. And I hope people will use this study to help them with their talking points as they advocate for those kinds of changes. And I hope tribes will see it as part of a strategy to increase education funding for tribal citizens, not just their members, but tribal citizens across the country.
That was going to be my next question. During your 10 years at the College Fund, have you seen an increase of tribal commitment by tribes? Tribal councils say, we really need to help get our kids through college. Have you seen has it improved? And I know there's some tribes that are still very, very poor. We saw, especially during COVID, that there are some tribes that are severely, very impacted by COVID.
Yeah, I think there's multiple ways that tribes are being supportive or could be supportive. Some tribes are paying for their own tribal members and fully funding or paying significant funding to them. We certainly support and encourage that. We also like the investment in institutions like us and the other scholarship providers, because our support is broader. Our support supports students from, whether or not their tribe has wealth. I think that's another good way to do that. I also think that it's important to invest in families and youth and in their understanding of what it takes to go to college. So the College Fund and some of the other scholarship providers, we have high school programs. So I think an investment in high school programs and middle school, kind of reaching back into the next generation and helping them see themselves and helping them get ready for the college experience, so they don't try to go to college without having considered what financial resources they might need and those kinds of things. So I think there's lots of approaches tribes are taking and can take.
So President Biden just released that, he's instituting a student loan relief program last week. What are your thoughts on this, and how do you think that, this program will affect the, younger generation and even the alumni that have expressed experiencing debt?
It's a great move, right? I'm very, we at the College Fund, we really recognize that a significant number of Native students are eligible for federal financial aid. So that means that they have the opportunity to get $20,000 of their student debt relief. We know a lot of families, individuals for whom the $10,000 in relief is something that they are looking forward to. We know people who are ready to apply as soon as the application process comes open. And so I think it's a very positive step. Like many others, I think that the cost of higher education is too much. And I think that we need a multiple pronged solution, to try to reduce the cost. And for me, it's things like ensuring that institutions have manageable size endowments, because you can distribute your money that you raise out in scholarships or financial aid instead of putting all of your money into endowments. I think it's managing the cost of everything in America is high, but I think it's managing the cost of higher education. There are tensions in the higher education system, that disproportionately impact students, such as the high cost of sports. That can create a disproportionate impact, the high cost of STEM programs and things like that. So I'd like to think that as a country, we could find solutions that don't put people in debt, but we do know a lot of Native people are going to benefit from this.
And with the student loan program, do you know how the student loan forgiveness will affect current students with student loan debt?
Well, I don't know how many students outside of the tribal colleges are eligible for federal financial aid, but I know nearly 90% of the students that attend tribal colleges are. So if that's reflective of the general Native student population that goes to college, I think that we're looking at a significant impact on your cost of education. That you should be able to at least, feel some financial relief as a student. Definitely, excuse me, definitely as an perhaps somebody who hasn't graduated, it might be the very boost that you need to go back to college, because you'll see that debt. This is one of the reasons why this study is so important, is we don't have a national data set for Native students. But I know, for example, that Excellencia in Education, which works with Latinx students, said, that there were literally hundreds of thousands of students of Hispanic heritage who would have their entire student loan debt wiped out by the $20,000. And so I think that might be true of a lot of Native students as well. I did see some data that said that Native women were the second highest borrower behind Black women. And and the debt average debt that they had was over $36,000. So if you're eligible for 20,000 of that to be relieved, I think that's pretty significant. It will give people, some breathing room for either furthering their education, maybe saving for their children's education, maybe buying a house, all those kinds of things.
Well, I'm going to say this as a Native American journalist. I really appreciate you doing that, because you mentioned there's a lack of data sets out there. Oftentimes as journalists, we go to write stories, research stories, and there's no data there. And so this study, I have gone through it 2 or 3 times myself. I was just thinking, this is some good stuff, and not necessarily good information. And it's good information for us to use to alleviate the barriers. And some of the information is sad, quite frankly, when it comes to our students, especially those who have the housing insecurities and food insecurities. And I think, I can't remember the percentage, but a certain percentage said that they have experienced that lack of food during any given month. And nobody wants to hear somebody's not able to eat. And we all know that college and education is really the ticket out of poverty for so many Native Americans and other people in general, and all Americans really. But so I really commend this study, that and keep up the good work at the American Indian College Fund, and I really love the collaboration with the 3 other groups. It's always good to see Native people working together, because
we are in the same business. We have this sort of competition side, because we're raising money at the same time we're serving all of our same people, and we have other collaborations going on, other research that's going on as well. And so I think you'll be happy to hear that we are joining together as a group to build a national Native student database that will be
nice.
able to be queried about the different experiences. And, the College Fund, we made a commitment several years ago that we would help tell the story of Native students' experience and tribal colleges and universities. And we did a study with Gallup Purdue that looked at alumni of tribal colleges. And I was thinking back to what you mentioned earlier about, healthcare being, in some cases, an unexpected expense or unplanned for expense for college students. And in our study of tribal college alumni, the alumni identified themselves as thriving in many areas of their lives, socially, economically. But the one area that they had challenges in was health. And so I think we see, all those challenges that we face as Indigenous people with accessing healthcare exacerbated for students because they don't have, the right kind of access to resources. And the College Fund and other organizations are also trying to support Native students and marginalized students in our Native students, like LGBTQ students or veterans or, other students who, need extra support because not only are they challenged by having their Native identity being misrepresented or underrepresented, but the other identities they have are also underrepresented. So we find ourselves as Native scholarship providers needing to be advocates in that space as well. And that's about financial support also.
What you just said made me think, well, we sure live in a complex society these days.
We do. Yeah, we do. Yeah, we have a lot of lessons that our ancestors taught us that help us navigate complexity.
Right.
So
yes.
I feel real confident.
Neely, do you have any other questions?
Yeah, I was just wondering, with the student loan forgiveness program and on top of this study, you briefly mentioned it, the ability, now that some of this debt for some people or all of it for others is now getting relieved, and that allows for them to, like you said, invest in, their children's college or their futures. And we talk a lot about, building intergenerational wealth. And how do you think that this program, this debt relief program and this study will help, increase Native families' ability to build that generational wealth?
Mm-hmm. I think of intergenerational wealth as being about identity and choice. So if we have access to resources that reinforce our identity, where you're able to afford to be on a land acknowledgement committee, or your family's having a naming ceremony and you're able to support that naming ceremony, or, a celebration or a memorial. I think of that's knowledge wealth, but it's also, you also need resource wealth to be able to do that. So I think of it in that respect. And then I think of it in security, the security of choice. So we know that education provides you with the skills that you need to get jobs that pay you a living wage. And we, as Indigenous peoples, as especially elders, we want our children and our grandchildren to be able to have that kind of choice and security. So with some of the other work that I'm involved with, people do identify that education is the pathway to that. And they do think of intergenerational wealth as being able to plan for the future and being able to have the safety of a home. So I'm hopeful that people will be able to see these resources in that way, that they can use them for that.
Well, Dr. Crazy Bo, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Do you have any other comments on anything you want to leave our viewers before you?
Yeah, I encourage people to go to the websites of the College Fund and Native Scholars Forward. Cobell Scholarship and the American Indian Science and Engineering Society. There's lots of resources there for students. There's career education resources. There's how to go to college, how to find a college that fits you. You should be watching for and applying for all the scholarships, getting help with figuring out how to fill out the FAFSA, looking for ways to access the loan forgiveness program. So I think that I encourage people to go to those websites. And then if you have listeners who feel it in their hearts that they want to support, Native students in their educational dreams, then I encourage you to give to those organizations that support them.
Thank you again.
Thank
you
you
so much. Yes. And to our viewers, thank you for tuning in today to our Facebook channel, Twitter, and YouTube. And join us next week for another edition of Native Bidaské. Have a good week.
If you appreciate what we do here at Native News Online, we invite you to donate to support our continued work covering Indian country. You can scan this code with your smartphone or go to the link located below this video to donate today. We greatly appreciate your support. We also want to invite you to subscribe to our daily newsletter, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you for joining us today, and be sure to join us again next week for another episode of Native Bidaské.